Professor Oded Lipschits from the Department of Archaeology and Ancient Near Eastern Cultures at Tel Aviv University is inviting you to join him to a journey following those who composed the historical descriptions in the Hebrew Bible.
The Untold Story of the Kingdom of Judah, Part E. The Untold Story about the Kingdom of Judah in the days of the biblical historiographers. Chapter 2. The untold story of Judah's enslavement to Assyria during the reign of King Ahaz. According to the opening formula of the days of Ahaz's reign in the second book of Kings, chapter 16, verses 1 and 2, and I'm quoting, in the 17th year of Pekah the son of Remaliah, Ahaz the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. Scholars dispute the chronology of his reign, but its starting point and ending point are well established historically in terms of both the biblical description and the information available in extra-biblical sources. The end point of Ahaz's reign is determined according to the time of his son Hezekiah's ascension to the throne, about which there are two conflicting traditions in the Hebrew Bible. According to one tradition, which is based on the synchronistic calculation of the biblical historiographer, Hezekiah acceded to the throne in the 3rd year of Hoshea, the son of Elah's reign. The synchronistic calculation is written in the second book of Kings, chapter 18, verse 1, as part of the opening formula about the days of Hezekiah. I'm quoting. In the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. Accordingly, the continuation of the calculation is described in verses 9 and 10, and I'm quoting. In the 4th year of King Hezekiah, which was the 7th year of Hoshea the son of Elah, king of Israel, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against Samaria and besieged it. And at the end of 3 years he took it. In the 6th year of Hezekiah, which was the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Israel, Samaria was taken. End of quote. Based on this calculation, Hezekiah came to power in 727 and reigned until 698 BCE. If so, then Ahaz died in the year of his son Hezekiah's accession in 727 BCE. Therefore, his 16 years of reign, apparently starting in 743 BCE, must have included long years of regency in the days of Jotham, his father. According to another tradition, based on the chronistic source that was probably incorporated into the biblical account of Sennacherib's campaign, the date of the Assyrian army coming up against Judah is described in the second book of Kings, chapter 18, verse 13, and also in Isaiah, chapter 36, verse 1. I'm quoting. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. End of quote. Since the date of the campaign, based on Assyrian sources, was the year 701 BCE, which according to this definition was also the 14th year of Hezekiah's reign, then his accession to the throne must be dated to the year 715. And if so, he ruled until 686 BCE. If so, then Ahaz, Hezekiah's father, must have died in 715 BCE. This source seems more logical and is not based on the complex synchronistic calculations of the biblical historiographers. The beginning of Ahaz's kingship is taken from the description of his encounter with Tiglath-Pileser, evidence in the second book of Kings, chapter 16, verses 9 and 10. Verse 9 commences, I'm quoting, The king of Assyria marched up against Damascus and took it, carrying its people captive to Kir, and he killed Rezin. According to the Assyrian sources, Tiglath-Pileser destroyed Damascus in 732 BCE. This is the only point in time when Ahaz could have met the Assyrian king there, become enslaved to him, and, as already discussed above in the previous chapter, seen the altar there and sent a model of it to a priest in Jerusalem so he would build for Ahaz a similar one, as is described in verse 10, and I'm quoting. When King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, he saw the altar that was at Damascus. And King Ahaz sent to Uriah the priest a model of the altar and its pattern, exact in all its details. End of quote. This means that in 732 BCE, Ahaz was already king of Judah. The question is, how much earlier did he ascend to the throne? As already described above in previous chapter, Tiglath-Pileser III conducted two campaigns to the northern and central Syria, one in 740 BCE and the other in 738 BCE. Thereafter, an anti-Assyrian regional alliance formed, apparently under the leadership of Rezin, king of Aram Damascus, and his main ally, Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, with the aim of stopping the Assyrian campaigns into the heart of Syria and towards the land of Israel. A note was added to the closing formula of the description of Yotam, the son of Uzziah's reign in Judah, in the second book of Kings, chapter 15, verse 37, according to which, I'm quoting, "In those days, Yahweh began to send Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, against Judah." End of quote. Adding to this, the opening description of the days of Ahaz, the son of Yotam's reign, in the second book of Kings, chapter 16, verse 5, states, and I'm quoting, "Then Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to wage war on Jerusalem, and they besieged Ahaz, but couldn't conquer him." End of quote. Many other details about the events of these years are presented in the stories surrounding Isaiah's prophecies and within the prophecies themselves, for example in chapter 7 verses 1 to 9 and chapter 8 verses 1 to 8. The conclusion from these details is that Ahaz acceded to the throne with the beginning of the Assyrian campaigns toward Syria in 734 BCE, and refused to join the Syro-Ephraimite alliance. This was the cause for Pekah, king of Israel, and Rezin, king of Aram Damascus, to go to war against Jerusalem, apparently with the aim of forcing Ahaz to join the alliance or to replacing him with another king who would change Judah's reluctant policy and join the regional alliance against Assyria. It is unlikely that this alliance continued to exist after the heavy blow that Assyrian inflicted on Damascus in 733 BCE. As described above, again, we discussed it in the previous chapter, the alliance likely broke up in this year, so that in 732 BCE, Tiglath-Pileser might have destroyed Damascus, where he met Ahaz, who enslaved to him. According to this reconstruction, it appears that Ahaz was a king in Judah between 734 and 715 BCE. From the discussion of the beginning of Ahaz's reign, it appears that he came to power at the time when the Syro-Ephraimite alliance was formed. Moreover, we can assume that Rezin, king of Damascus, and Pekah, king of Israel, attacked Judah immediately upon Ahaz's ascension in order to take advantage of his yet unestablished status, and in the hope that they could force him to join the war or replace him with another king. At this point, Ahaz revealed himself as a wise and determined king, and as one who maintained the traditional policy of the kings of Judah, who always advocated for submission to the big and powerful kingdoms based on their assessment that Judah was too weak and small to counteract these powerful forces and would be unable to survive a strong military blow. With the support of the prophet Isaiah, while facing those who sought to join the anti-Assyrian alliance and wanted to replace Ahaz with another king, Ahaz was wise enough to understand the magnitude of Assyria's power, assessed that it would win against the Syro-Ephraimite alliance, and realized that preventing Judah from rebelling against Assyria was the only possible option for maintaining its independence. Indeed, despite the severe Assyrian attack on the kingdom of Israel and the destruction of Damascus in 732 BCE, Judah remained unscathed. The discussion of the events from the first years of Ahaz's reign also show the paucity of details described in the biblical historiography, the potential availability of additional details in prophetic sources, if these sources exist and can be attributed to specific points in history. The historiographical descriptions in 2nd Book of Kings, chapter 16, are very general. They reflect the ideology of the historiographers within the broad context of describing the history of Judah. The war of Rezin and Pekah against Ahaz is described in unspecific terms without detailing the time and with the emphasis on the siege that was on Jerusalem. This is in verse 5. Then Rezin, king of Aram, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to wage war on Jerusalem, and they besieged Ahaz but couldn't conquer it. And it described as is the enslavement of Ahaz to Tiglath-Pileser, as described in verse 7. So Ahaz sent the messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am your servant and your son. Come up and rescue me from the hand of the king of Syria and from the hand of the king of Israel, who are attacking me. Ahaz's submission receives harsh criticism from the biblical historiographer, which describes this enslavement in a very negative way. And this is in verse 8, I'm quoting. Ahaz also took the silver and gold that was found in the house of Yahweh and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent it to the king of Assyria as a bribe. This enslavement is used as a background for Ahaz's visit to Damascus and the story of the altar he saw over there. And we read it in verses 10 and 11. When King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, he saw the altar that was at Damascus, and King Ahaz sent to Uriah the priest a model of the altar and its pattern, exact in all its details, and Uriah the priest built the altar in accordance with all that King Ahaz had sent from Damascus. So Uriah the priest made it before King Ahaz arrived from Damascus, before he came back to Jerusalem. In Isaiah chapter 7 and 8, on the other hand, many additional details are given, including Rezin and Pekah's plan to replace Ahaz with another king. And we can read it from chapter 7, verses 5 and 6. Because Aram, with Ephraim and the son of Remaliah, has devised evil against you, saying, let us go up against Judah and terrify it, and let us conquer it from ourselves, and set up the son of Tabel as king in the midst of it. End of quote. From Isaiah's prophecies, there are also indications that there were various parties in Jerusalem who were fed up with Ahaz's moderate policy and supported the kings who besieged the city. And again, we can read from chapter 8, verse 6. Because these people refused the waters of Shiloach that flow gently, and rejoice in Rezin and the son of Remaliah. End of quote. The Deuteronomistic historiographers condemned Ahaz's enslavement to Tiglath-Pileser. From their perspective, writing in the days of Josiah, after Assyria withdrew from the region, and its century-long reign was now but a memory, the kings who agreed to be enslaved by foreign kingdoms were condemned, and the kings who rebelled were praised. This meant that Ahaz was contrasted with his son Hezekiah, that as a rebel to Assyria was considered a good king, in contrast to the image of his father that was condemned as a king who surrendered and became a slave to Assyria. In my opinion, the presentation of Ahaz in a negative light as a king who enslaved himself by paying bribe to Assyria, in contrast to Hezekiah, who rebelled against Assyria, also affected his theological assessment. The opening formula about Ahaz, as described in chapter 16, verse 2, includes a negative assessment, and he did not do what was right in the eyes of Yahweh, his God, as his father David has done. But this negative formula is written differently from the usual negative evaluation formulae. The latter usually state simply, and he did what was evil in the eyes of Yahweh, in contrast to the positive evaluation formula, which usually determines directly, and he did what was right in the eyes of Yahweh. This is the only case that we have here in which the negative is added to the formula of the positive assessment. Moreover, the formula was expanded in two additional verses in chapter 16, verses 3 and 4. I'm reading. But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. He even burned his son as an offering, according to the abominable practices of the nations whom Yahweh drove out before the people of Israel. And he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. End of quote. Ahaz is the only one among the kings of Judah who didn't reign in parallel to the Omride kings of Israel, which were in a covenant with them and were even connected to them by family ties, Yoram and Ahaziah. But even though was described with the phrase, but he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. This is in chapter 16, verse 3. He is also the only one among the kings of Judah about whom it is said that he even burned his son as an offering, and only of him and Menashe is it said in the opening formula that, according to the abominable practices of the nations whom Yahweh drove out before the people of Israel. Ahaz is also the only king among all the kings of Judah about whom it is said that he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree, while all four kings who preceded him, Jehoash, Amaziah, Uzziah, and Yotam, were said to have done what was right in the eyes of God, and the Deuteronomistic caveat is also given, which knows in hindsight that the high places were not removed. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places, and this is in 2nd Book of Kings, chapter 14, verse 3. In my opinion, this means that when the Deuteronomistic historiographers decided to criticize Ahaz, tarnish his name, and paint his reign in a negative light, they collected from their collection of formulae a series of special, particularly negative evaluation designed to single out Ahaz and differentiate him from the other kings of Judah. They described him as the only king whose negative evaluation formula is turned into the standard positive formula, single him out as the only king who put his son through fire according to the abominable practices of the nations, and paint him as the only one who himself sinned by sacrifice and burned incense on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. Like the Omride kings, he also followed the path of the kings of Israel. The concentration of so many familiar formulae on one king made Ahaz the king whose negative historiographic evaluation is special in its intent and in its connection with all the other kings of Judah who received negative evaluation. This was the case even before King Menashe, the grandson of Ahaz, was chosen as the most sinful king among all the kings, as the one at fault for the destruction of Judah. Of course, this later depiction couldn't have been made before the destruction of Judah. Therefore, it belongs to the expansions and completions made in the description of the history of Judah during the Babylonian exile. Ahaz's enslavement to Tiglath-Pileser seems to have been the main memory that the biblical historiographer had. This memory might have been rooted in the altar that stood from the days of Ahaz until the destruction of the first temple, which may have been related to Ahaz's visit to Damascus and to the name of the king who ordered it to be placed in the temple. Although this altar was not removed during the reforms of Hezekiah and Josiah and continued to exist and be used in the temple, the historiographers may have had criticism, even if hidden ones, towards this practice, which emphasized the moving of Solomon's altar in favor of an altar copied from the temple in Damascus. In this context, additional memories of Ahaz's construction activity in the temple can be considered, even though they were not described in the history of his reign. Like the altars that, according to the description of Josiah's cultic reform in 2nd Book of Kings, chapter 23, verse 12, were on the roof of the temple, I'm quoting, and the altars on the roof of the upper chamber of Ahaz, which the kings of Judah had made, end of quote, and which King Josiah broke into pieces, removed from the temple, and, I'm quoting, cast the dust of them into the brook of Kidron, end of quote. Scholars have linked what they called the upper chamber of Ahaz, mentioned in the passage of Josiah's cultic reform, to the dial of Ahaz, mentioned in the description of the days of Hezekiah in the 2nd Book of Kings, chapter 20, verse 11, and also in Isaiah 38, verse 8, and have proposed to connect this to the practice of sun worship, which involved altars erected under the open sky. This memory about Ahaz, which was also embedded memory-bearing objects, places, and buildings in the temple complex, and the very judgmental view the historiographers had towards his agreeing to enslavement to Assyria from their perspective during the days of Josiah, after the Assyrian retreat from the area, underestimate the value of a brave and wise king. Indeed, Ahaz had reigned in one of the most turbulent periods in the kingdom of Judah had ever known, during Assyria's takeover of the entire region. Yet, he managed to survive the attack by the Syro-Ephraimite alliance and guarded the borders of his kingdom against the Assyrians as well as the Judahite semi-independence. The archaeological research testifies to the enormous administrative and economic changes that the kingdom of Judah underwent under Ahaz. We can attribute to Ahaz the establishment of magnificent administrative centers near Jerusalem, to the south of it, dispersed through the Armon-Anatsiv ridge. Predominant among these is the unique building in Ramat Rachel, which was the largest, most impressive building built in Judah at the time, with an architectural style that included decorated stone capitals, carved window balustrades, and stone crenellations on the top of the walls. Next to the building in Ramat Rachel on the eastern side of the ridge and at a distance of about 700 meters, a magnificent administrative center was also established in today Mordot Arnona neighborhood. In the next chapter, we will discuss these buildings and their significance in the landscape south of Jerusalem, but information on the development process of agricultural estates in the hill country around Jerusalem support the assumption that these luxurious buildings were established as administrative centers for the collection of agricultural produce under the imperial guidance and supervision, so as to enable Judah to pay high annual taxes to the Assyrian Empire. This process probably began in the days of King Ahaz, in the last third of the 8th century BCE, in the Rephaim Valley, in the vicinity of Moza, in the western part of the Benjamin region, and perhaps in other places around Jerusalem. During this period, technological changes and improvements also occurred in the agricultural production facilities in Judah. There was a noticeable change in the characteristics of pottery production in Judah, which progressed from unstandardized production on a small scale and in local workshops to mass production and wide distribution of vessels with a small variety of vessels with a uniform shape. During this period, the use of storage jars with a large volume also began. The change from this era also manifested in the wide distribution of the shekel weights, which unified the customary measurements enabling better monitoring of commercial life and the economy in Judah. All of these advancements show a centralized royal economy which improved the production of agricultural produce and its transportation, led and encouraged by a central government. Many researchers have noted these changes and also agreed with their dating to the later part of the 8th century BCE. However, the direct connection to Ahaz's reign and the enslavement to Assyria was not understood as the decisive and driving factor for all these. I also argue that the lamelech belonging to the king stamp impressions on the handles of storage jars should be seen as part of the economic and administrative system that began to operate in Judah under the rule of King Ahaz, with the Assyrian rule's encouragement and perhaps even with the pressure to increase agricultural production as part of the annual taxes that Assyria imposed on the kingdom of Judah. This is reinforced by the evidence of the selection of a specific type of jars which were produced and used in the lowlands region for over a century, and its transformation into the foundation of the produce collection system. The production of this particular type of jar of high quality and unprecedented uniformity on which the entire Lamelech stamp system was based, and the concentration of over half of the jars dated to the end of the 8th century BCE in one place, Lachish, testify to the scope and conduct of this system. Furthermore, the Lamelech stamp impression on jars, which should be dated to the period after the enslavement of Judah to Assyria, as early as the days of Ahaz or the beginning of the days of Hezekiah, should be understood as part of the servitude arrangements established by the Assyrian rule in Judah when it became a vassal kingdom. We might assume, although it is impossible to prove, that the symbol chosen in Judah when the system began was the four-winged beetle, whose source of inspiration is in Egypt. An Egyptian influence is also evident in other contexts within the administrative system in Judah at the end of the 8th century BCE, for example, in the symbol of the shekel that was incised on the weights in the system of weights used. This choice seems natural at a stage when the Assyrian presence in the Judah was not yet established, after many years of contact with the Egyptian Empire and its close presence. In the next chapter, we will discuss the establishment of the administrative centers in Ramat Rachel and Mordot Arnona, the significance of the tremendous economic and administrative developments that took place during the days of King Ahaz, and the complete disregard of all these in the biblical descriptions of this period. See you in the next chapter.